Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I am talking about Warhammer 40k Age of Empire. So I'm actually going to be talking about Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and I'm also going to be talking about Warhammer 40k and changes that I think are coming to the game. All right, so basically, real quick, my relationship to Warhammer 40k. I'm absolutely fascinated with the world of Warhammer 40k. I really like the fluff a lot. I've actually tried quite a bit to get into the game. I've had an incredible amount of struggles getting into the game. I've never seen a game that I'm more interested in playing that had more obstacles to actually playing it, right? But the game absolutely fascinates me, and I like refuse to give up on it. So I have a very small collection of Warhammer 40k. I play with one or two people very infrequently, and I'm trying to play more, but I'm also trying to play on the cheap, which is a very strange way to approach Warhammer 40k. So one of the things that for Warhammer 40k, I'm in the learning phase of it, right? So one of the things I really like Warhammer 40k, which is the science fiction elements of the Warhammer universe. Now, there is a Warhammer fantasy game, right, which I'm fully aware of. And I had seen it on the shelves for many years. Recently, this thing called Warhammer Age of Sigmar came out. And so there's a few things kind of related in this topic. So here's the issue, right? I found this new person on YouTube. It is the person who does the channel Tabletop Minions. Now, when I went to determine who that person was, he's one of these YouTubers who has suppressed his name, right? So he uses this fake name, but the channel is Tabletop Minions, right? Fantastic channel. It's the best channel I've seen for 40k by far, right? And one of the reasons why is he's really got a very even temper, and he's very good at collecting data and giving data and communicating ideas. And so I learned more in a day from watching him about Warhammer Age of Sigmar, the new Warhammer fantasy game, and I learned more about Warhammer overall than I probably learned from watching all of the other Warhammer channels that I've ever seen, right? And the reason why is whenever I come to Warhammer YouTube channels or even like podcasts or any other, or blogs, like they are coming at you from a perspective of you are steeped in Warhammer. Like you're like a bag of tea that's sat in the hot water, and what you really need to know is how to put wash on a mini, right? And they're talking about paint pots and all this. Here's another thing. I'm absolutely fascinated with Warhammer. I want to be a Warhammer player. I am a Warhammer player. I want to be a better Warhammer player. I want to play more Warhammer. I want to have more armies. I don't want to paint. I do not want to paint, right? So again, I understand that all this is on me. Like my approach to the hobby is very, very different, right? But I really am convinced, that there should be. I'm not convinced there is a place for a person who doesn't want to paint in the Warhammer community, but I'm convinced there should be, right? And so that's why I persist, right? But I learned so much from Tabletop Minions. So what I'm about to say came from Tabletop Minions. I'm just sourcing it, right? So here's what I learned, right? Warhammer Age of Sigmar is a brand new Warhammer game, right? It has infuriated people who played Warhammer Fantasy by and large, okay? If you take 10 Warhammer Fantasy players who played the game for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 8 or 9 of them are going to be furious, and one of them will be playing Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And so, fascinating, absolutely fascinating, right? What made everybody angry about Warhammer Age of Sigmar? Warhammer Age of Sigmar completely changed Games Workshop's approach to Warhammer Fantasy. So what they did, Warhammer Fantasy had exactly the same structure as Warhammer 40k. So what they did with Warhammer Age of Sigmar is they made it so that all you really buy is the minis. They got rid of selling you the codexes and the rule books. This is a huge, huge, huge change, right? So if you go, so basically you and a buddy can walk into a shop and you can buy a box of Skavens and a box of Skeletons. You can then take those boxes home, paint them, download a 4-page rule book, and for free, for nothing. And I already did this. As soon as the Tabletop Minions guy talked about this, I downloaded the rules, and I downloaded a war scroll. So you need two things. You need to download the rules, and then you download the war scroll for the box you bought, whether it's Skavens or whether it's Skeletons, right? Whatever, whatever army you bought, right? So now what this does is it vastly, vastly lowers the bar for players to get in, right? Because and the guy on Tabletop Minions talked about this. He's like, if a new player walks up to the shelf and says, hey, I want to play Warhammer 40K, what they tell him is, hey, buy this $80 rulebook, buy a $50 codex, and buy a $65 starter box. Now hand me $200 and you can start. And people are like, no, right? And so I totally get it, right? So the company is saying we're no longer going to sell rules. We're no longer going to sell codexes. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I think it's a great idea, right? Here's the next thing that absolutely infuriated Warhammer Fantasy players. Excuse me. So the next thing that infuriated them is when you build a Warhammer 40K army, each model has a point value, right? This model's worth 75 points. This model's worth 150 points, right? So one figure, one soldier, this soldier can be 50 points and this soldier can be 150 points. They might have the same weapons and the same armor, right? But they might have special abilities. They might have special equipment on them, right? That makes them more powerful, and then you get a different different ability to fight with them, right? So what Warhammer Age of Sigmar does is it doesn't have any point values, right? So what you do is your war scroll has told you what each of the guys does. And so then what you do is you actually take turns putting models on the table. Take turns putting models on the table, right? Which is brilliant. I think it's great. Again, it just makes, because what it does is it takes away that 3 hours that you had to plan to actually build your army, which some people find fun, but it's an obstacle. It's an obstacle getting players in, right? You could take that same 2 hours that you would have planned, you could have used planning your Warhammer army, and with Warhammer Age of Sigmar, you just play the game in that 2 hours, right? Absolutely brilliant. Great idea, right? There's another change that they made that, so those are the two big changes. The point buy and no longer selling the rules, no longer selling the codexes, right? So these are absolutely mammoth changes to the Warhammer Fantasy game, right? So very, very different, and that's a very significant change. Now, the reason I'm making this video is this is my prediction. This is my prediction. Warhammer Age of Sigmar is a practice round for the destruction. Actually, that's another thing. For the destruction of the Warhammer 40K hobby as it stands today, and there will be a Warhammer 40K Age of Empire where they will do exactly the same thing for Warhammer 40K. They will tear it to the ground, and then they'll let Warhammer Age of the Emperor stand on top. So it is my prediction that what happened to Warhammer Fantasy being replaced by Warhammer Age of Sigmar is going to happen with Warhammer 40K, and Warhammer 40K will become Warhammer 40K Age of the Emperor, okay? And I think this is a 100% great thing. I think it's absolutely necessary. And the reason why is the people who play Warhammer 40K are generally people who have an immense amount of money and are incredibly dedicated to painting and also really like the old style, right? Well, you can't run a business on a model that's dying. And there are fewer and fewer of the people who play Warhammer 40K. Last time I was in my local gaming shop, I asked, what are the hot games right now? And he said Warhammer 40K was about last. The hot games right now, Frostgrave is very hot for wargaming. X-Wings miniature is very hot. The Star Trek game has a little bit of shine. The Star Trek Starship game. Malifaux, people like Malifaux. And also War Machine and Hordes, right? All of those games at the local gaming shop were selling better than Warhammer 40K, right? Warhammer 40K has been around for 30 or 40 years. They are not going to stand by and watch their business disappear, right? So you could take all of your old customers, infuriate them, right? And then have a chance at getting a growing business where a 10-year-old kid, a 15-year-old kid, a 20-year-old college student, a 25-year-old guy who just got married, a 30-year-old guy who just had a kid, all of them can say, hey, I can buy a box for $30 or $40, pay in a few figs, and play this game, right? That is a growing audience. And honestly, to me, I'm fascinated by this subject because what you're looking at is a company trying to determine how to deal with its fan base, right? And in a modern fan base, right? And one of the things I think is really fascinating that I think is just, is really to understand where we're heading with. So Warhammer 40K is a meta topic. What's happening with Warhammer 40K happens with a lot of games. A lot of games want to go to a new version. And so every game should be very carefully watching what's happening with Warhammer 40K because these guys are stepping through it. And they're doing this with a lot of resources and a lot of thought, right? And so it's just really fascinating to see how they're managing this. And one of the things, too, 2016 was a very difficult year, right, for a lot of people. And one of the things that I think I learned from 2016 is that sometimes there are people who are making a lot of noise and are saying, I'm against this thing, right? And, and I'm really, they're saying I'm against this thing and they're being very vocal about it. And a lot of times people think that is the majority because they're the loudest, right? Now, I think if they were to go Warhammer 40K, Age of Empire, you would have probably, a few hundred or even a few thousand Warhammer 40K fans who would lose their mind, melt the internet, just tirade after tirade after tirade. But the reality is they would be really the minority. And there's more players out there who are willing to try something new. And when you say, I'm going to make my product accessible by 10 times or 100 times the audience it has now, that's a good business model, And so I have a lot of sympathy for Games Workshop, and honestly, I'm totally ready to play Warhammer 40K Age of Emperor. Bring it on, right? I'm really convinced this is the way to go. So I'm continuing to download War Scrolls for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and I think if I jump in and try the game out, it looks really exciting, but it's very, I'm really fascinated by all of this. Also, a very big thank you to Tabletop Minions. Guys doing fantastic YouTube content. I highly recommend you go out and check him out. He is one of the best YouTubers out there that I've seen. Really does a really great job of thinking about what his point is, making his point, and then bringing it to you in a clear manner that is winsome and useful, right? So I highly recommend Tabletop Minions, and thanks for hearing me talk about Warhammer 40K Age of Emperor. Take care.